But before we get started, James, would you praise that? Thank you so much. Good to have everybody here, and it was a blessing and encouragement just to see everybody here, and also uh, everybody who is watching online and streaming. And we are continuing. We're at midpoint in our summer study of the book of Daniel, chapter a week. We've gone through the first 6 chapters, the chapters that everybody is, or most folks are pretty familiar with, at least some portions of it, because there's some really high profile stories that are easy to understand and enjoy. We are now going into the second half of Daniel, the section of Daniel that half jokingly I refer to as the dark side of the moon, because just as everybody is very familiar with those first chapters of Daniel, there is probably a whole bunch of folks who are not very familiar with this other half of Daniel, because it's these are the chapters that rarely get brought up in a Bible study or at church or whatever. But it's important because excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. It's important because, according to some folks, this second half of Daniel forms what they call the backbone of Bible prophecy. And I am not a scholar in terms of prophetic literature of the end time scriptures, or by any means. All I can do is just say, we don't know what we don't know with regard to biblical prophecy. We know some things that have already happened, and we can kind of check those off. There are some things that have yet to happen and are subject to interpretation. And with that caution, that we'll go into chapter 7 here, if you haven't already turned into it in your Bibles or your devices. Up to this point, what we've been reading in Daniel is pretty much has been chronological. Daniel started out, when we first met Daniel, he was probably not much more than a teenager, kidnapped, maybe not kidnapped, but basically brought as part of a whole bunch of other folks from Jerusalem to Babylon. And we have watched Daniel grow, not only physically in age, but also in terms of power, in terms of influence, because as he has trusted God, God has blessed that trust and that faith, and he has shown out in the lives of Daniel and his friends. And a powerful lesson to us, to the rest of us as Christians. This is what faith in God is about. God will not let you down. Chapter 7, the scene kind of shifts. It's not, we are no longer in a chronological timeline here. This is what happens in chapter 7 does not happen chronologically after chapter 6. In fact, it goes a little bit back on the timeline, because if you remember, when we got into chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar had died, and eventually succeeded by his grandson, Belshazzar. And it's actually in the, as chapter 7 opens up, we find that what we're about to read takes place in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So keep that in mind. We are back in the days of the Babylonian Empire. By the time chapter 6 is finished, the Babylonians are history. They've been conquered by the Medes and the Persians. But don't worry about that right now. Just kind of back up to the days when Belshazzar from the Babylonians has just taken over the throne. And it's during that first year of his reign that Daniel had a dream. and visions. You may be reading a translation that calls that dream a night vision. Well, one and the same. But this just ain't any old dream. You know, a lot of us, most of us probably dream every night. Maybe we have more than one dream, depending on how long we sleep. And they can be quite vivid, but in a lot of cases, unless they're just very, 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 very vivid, we don't remember them when we wake up. You know, you could start the conversation and say, I had this interesting dream last night. And, you know, suddenly your mind goes blank. I just, well, what is it? I forgot. Well, it must not have been important, right? Well, this is a significant dream because it was vivid enough that Daniel wrote down the substance of his dream. Verse 2, Daniel said, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. Let's clarify a few things here. Four winds of heaven. Obviously, there's a lot of symbolism in this dream. The four winds of heaven basically have to do with the turmoil that mankind is going through or will go through. Those four winds may be stirred up by God. That's one interpretation. The Great Sea. Keep in mind that back in the day, these empires, as far-flung as they were, hadn't really gone all that. They really didn't know all that much about the earth and everything in it. So when they're talking about the Great Sea, very likely they're talking about the Mediterranean, because all these countries that are part of these empires touch in some way, or at least are very close to what we know today to be the Mediterranean. So that's the Great Sea. In any event, it's bigger than Lake Travis. And out of this Great Sea come four great beasts, each different from the others. Now, these are really some honking beasts, let me tell you. We'll get a description of them, but and in fact, there have been artist depictions of what these beasts might have looked like. In fact, you can probably Google the beast of Daniel chapter 7 and, you know, for some artist depictions of what these four beasts look like. I don't know that you really get into or can truly classify or draw or illustrate what these beasts look like. But four beasts, and not just any old beast, not just your regular cartoon characters or whatever. These are spectacular beasts, and they are designed in a particular way. First beast comes up in verse 4. The first beast was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. Interestingly enough, if you look at some of the pictures of the illustrations that were used by the Babylonians the Babylonian officials to basically symbolize their empire and everything that was attached to it, what do you find? You find pictures or etchings or engravings of lions with wings. A lion with the wings of the eagle. That's the first beast that comes up. So this gives you an idea that, hey, this probably has to do with the present day Babylonian Empire, as far as Daniel's concerned. Daniel keeps watching, and he watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of a human was given to it. Does this sound a little bit familiar? Kind of sounds a little bit what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, right? You know, when God humbled him, where Nebuchadnezzar, in a burst of arrogance, is walking around on the roof of his palace and says, hey, wonderful city Babylon, wonderful thing, everything that I see around me. And I did it. I made this possible. And the words were barely out of his mouth when, boom, God begins to change him into a beast. In fact, so beastly that he has to spend something like 7 years outside the palace. They have to build apparently a corral for him where he can his hair grows out, his hair become like feathers, his hands turn into claws. Eee. And but he goes around on all fours until the time appointed by God that says, okay, that's enough. And he resumes human form, back on his feet. This beast lifted from the ground to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it, much as Nebuchadnezzar's human mind was restored to him. Those of you all who might be joining us right now, we are in Daniel chapter 7, and we're about to do verse 5. We've looked at the first of the 4 beasts that in Daniel's dream. Verse 5, there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. Kind of, sort of, could have been a bear, maybe not exactly. Bears are different from lions, but hey, you don't want to mess with a lion, you don't want to mess with a bear. Each are very strong and very powerful in different ways. This beast was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. Now, this beast is symbolic of another kingdom, pardon my phone, and most folks agree, yeah, this represents an empire. This is the empire that comes after the Babylonian Empire. These are the Medes and the Persians. Not much controversy about that. And it's interesting that this beast that has 3 ribs, I wonder if it was really into short ribs or, it knew some really good barbecue places or whatever, but it has 3 ribs between its teeth. According to some analyses, these 3 ribs could represent the 3 major conquests that the Medes and the Persians made for the duration of its empire. Those 3, of course, Babylon. After Babylon, they went on to conquer Egypt, and then they also conquered a country or a region by the name of Lydia. Lydia? What's Lydia? Well, that's pretty much present-day Turkey. So they pretty much got the Middle East and Western Asia locked up as part of their empire. Verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, a third one that looked like a leopard. Yeah, now leopards are understandably different in probably in power and strength from lions and bears. But what is the thing about the leopard? They are very agile. They're quick. They are swift. When a lot of their victims don't know that they're about to be victims until the leopard springs on them. That's how good they are. On its back, it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. Now, this beast is interpreted to be the kingdom that succeeds the Medes and the Persians. Who would that be? That would be the Greek Empire. Who ran the Greek Empire at that time? Well, that would be Alexander the Great, who was basically a great warrior. He knew what he was doing and how to do it. He was great about conquering pretty much what was every part of the known world. And then he died. Excuse me. I listened to one commentator who said with a straight face, without the slightest bit of sarcasm, that Alexander died because of a broken heart, because there were no more worlds to conquer, which was, no, that's not really what happened. There was some physical ailment that got to him. And the thing about Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire, was that when he died, his kingdom actually was divvied up, at least in terms of the control and the operation, the management of it, left over to 4 of his generals. So that could explain the 4 wings, the 4 heads. Verse 7, after that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. And while I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Or your translation may actually read pompously. So what's this final beast all about? Well, most folks agree this represents or is symbolic of the Roman Empire, the longest lasting of these various empires or kingdoms. Romans lasted longer than anyone else. And there was no empire quite like the Roman Empire. It really was. Like Alexander the Great, they wound up conquering pretty much everything that was known to humankind at that time. It basically owned the entire world as far as they were concerned. Does this sound a little bit familiar, like another dream that we read about earlier in Daniel? Well, yeah, it kind of tracks the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, chapter 2. Remember the big dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he challenged his brain trust. You tell me what my dream is and what it means, and I'll let you live. And Daniel winds up telling him, and he says, yeah, here's the dream. There's this big, big, big statue looking like a king, and it's standing up. And the interesting thing about this statue is that it's made of various components. The head is made of gold. The shoulder and arms are made of silver. The section of the torso is made of bronze. The legs are made of steel or iron. And the feet, the very bottom feet, it's a mixture of steel or iron and clay. They didn't have steel back then. But what we're reading here tracks very much what it was in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And of course, it wasn't just any old dream. It was a prophetic dream, God telling everyone, this is the course of history as we know it, as I intend it. And this is what we're seeing here. The fourth beast with the large iron teeth, crushing and devouring its its victims, trampling underfoot whatever was left. Basically, that could describe the Roman Empire. It was powerful. It not only was it far-flung and widespread, it was powerful. It was ruthless. Just in fact, if you've been watching any of the episodes of The Chosen, you get a really good idea of what it was like to live under the Romans. Not fun. You had to be very, very careful what you did, what you said, where you went. This is the fourth beast. And eventually, as we know, the Roman Empire went away. It was conquered. The books have been written about the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire. And of course, there were various governments, various kingdoms, various little empires that arose after the Roman Empire, but nothing that really matched the Roman Empire. So that could very well be describing the 10 horns that we got here, which also correlate to the 10 toes in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And the interesting part here, of course, is the little horn that comes up and uproots 3 of the original horns. And also, one other thing about this particular horn, it's really a jerk. It just goes around saying and mouthing off and trash talking everybody. We'll leave that there because there's more to come. Daniel continues, verse 9. He said, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. The Ancient of Days. Who could that be? Really can't be any other one than God himself. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire. and its wheels were ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him, thousands upon thousands, too numerous to count. These thousands of thousands, maybe angelic hosts, 10,000s times 10,000 stood before him. Could that be all humanity? A lot of this language sounds a little bit familiar if you've spent any time in the book of Revelation. Man, that's kind of sounds like Revelation chapter 4. The court was seated. If you've ever been in a real live court session, or at least if you've watched Perry Mason or Matlock, you know what a courtroom and what court sessions are all about. The court's seated after the judge is seated, and the books were opened. Judgment is approaching. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. A reference to all these other nations and kingdoms that would go on and persevere in some form or some fashion, apparently through the end of time. In my vision at night, I looked. Up to this time, we've been talking about 4 kingdoms, 4 empires. There's a 5th one here. And there before me, in verse 13, there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. Does that sound familiar? Who referred to himself often as the Son of Man? Jesus. Who is pictured in Revelation chapter 1 as coming, coming in the clouds of heaven? That would be Jesus. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. It sounds very, very much like the scene in heaven in Revelation chapter 5. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. That's Daniel's dream. The dream has a happy ending, but Daniel doesn't know that. There's a lot he doesn't understand. I, Daniel, as he continues in verse 15, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts, or 4 kings, you can read that as 4 kingdoms, 4 empires, I think is a better description of what we think about these far-flung realms of power. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. That's a pretty good description of the Roman Empire, because we're talking about the fourth kingdom, because there is more to come. Verse 24, the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. And after them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High. Your translation may include the words, he will speak pompous, blasphemous words against the Most High and oppress or persecute his holy people. He won't kill them, or at least maybe not put all of them to death, but he'll persecute them. What does that word precisely mean, persecute, when you're persecuting someone? Well, persecution is harassment. It's harassment in whatever way you can implement it. It's not a one-off or a one-time or oops, didn't mean to do that kind of thing, harassment. It is systematic, it's ongoing, and it can be cruel. The very word persecute comes from the word that means to wear away or to wear out, kind of like friction or erosion. You know, if you have a favorite shirt or a favorite dress and you keep wearing it all the time, it eventually wears out, gets a little threadbare. You know what I mean? See what I'm saying? If you wear things out, you know, one thing that you have to, especially when you're working with water, if you're working around bodies of water, rivers, lakes, one thing you have to guard against, especially if you've got a sloping landscape and you're watering it, or you have these constant heavy rains, you got to guard against and prevent erosion, soil erosion, because that water has the power to wash things away. Wearing away, wearing out. That's an apt phrase of persecution. The whole point of persecution is to just wear the other person out. Get them to a point where okay, fine, I've had enough. Just, I give up. I'll just stop. Yeah, I'll stop if you will. So this is what this character is going to do. He's going to speak. He's blasphemously against the Most High. He will oppress or persecute his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. I don't like this current system of right and wrong. I'm going to make up my own list. I don't like 24/7 in terms of keeping time. I don't like a 7-day week. I don't like a 24-hour day. From now on, we're going to have 10-day weeks and 30-hour days. What do you think about that? Well, okay. Not that you can really change something like that, but this guy will be arrogant enough to think that he can change just about anything he wants to. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Now, what does that phrase mean? Well, a popular interpretation of that phrase is a time is 1 year. Times is plural, and most folks assume that, well, if it's plural, we'll just double it. So that's 2 years. Half a time is half a year. Add it all up, that's 3.5 years. If we're talking about a literal timeline. That is something, of course, that's where you can kind of get on a slippery slope if you're doing biblical prophecy, because God's timetable and God's times are not necessarily people's times. So it could mean 3.5 years. It could mean something totally different. The whole point is, yeah, this guy, this bad actor, is going to make everybody's lives extremely miserable for a period of time, for a limited time. It's not going to be forever. God's going to see to that. It will not be everlasting because, verse 26, the court will sit, meaning God's court, meaning God himself, and this dude's power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. Again, one final little comparison with of this dream with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. What happens at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dream? This rock, just out of nowhere, comes bouncing down and knocks down the giant statue, and just totally obliterates it, destroys it, knocks it into pieces. Not only that, the rock grows as it rolls, and basically until it just consumes everything around it. That rock, of course, is the kingdom of God. And you see you see kind of the same comparison here. Yeah, the bad guys will have fun for a while, and then God will say, okay, that's enough, and he will implement the final kingdom, the kingdom of his Son, the Son of Man, the Most High. And this, unlike the other kingdoms which come and go, and kind of, well, they have their good days and they have their bad days, the kind of thing. This kingdom will be in existence forever and ever and ever. Final verse. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Well, there are three ways that today that Bible scholars and experts choose to interpret this dream. The first one is that this dream doesn't mean anything. There's nothing here in the way of prophecy. It was just a dream. Daniel was mistaken thinking it meant anything bigger than that. Obviously, there are not a lot of people who sign on to that interpretation. The second interpretation is that the fulfillment of this dream is strictly spiritual and symbolic. Just as these beasts are symbolic of the kingdoms, well, everything else that's been spoken of is also symbolic. And not only that, it's also there's a spiritual aspect to it. So that this interpretation goes so far as to say that Daniel's dream has been totally fulfilled, at least in a spiritual manner. Because, yes, when Christ established his church, the kingdom came and the kingdom is complete. This is the interpretation. Then there's a third school of interpretation that says that this fulfillment is and should be literal. Because some of it has already been fulfilled. You really can't argue about the progress of the major empires here. Babylon, the Medes and Persians, the Greeks, the Roman Empire. That's already happened. Nobody can argue against that. And to the degree that, as for the rest of Daniel's dream, that is a portion that remains to be fulfilled in the future. The way you might describe this interpretation, or how to interpret this, is the phrase already and not yet. Some of it has already happened. Some of it has not yet happened. We're still waiting for that final fulfillment. Who's right? Who's wrong? I don't think that, or what I go back to my opening statement. We don't know what we don't know. And so it's kind of hard to come in and say with authority, to the point where you can try to shout somebody down, this is how you should interpret this, and I'm right and you're wrong. They could be right, but we're not sure in some cases. I think at the end of the day, God is going to wrap things up, and that in a way that's going to surprise everybody, including those folks who thought they have a lock on how to interpret biblical prophecy. So basically, my feeling is, or my recommendation is, keep an open mind on whatever you are about to read in Daniel. Keep an open mind on what any kind of discussion you have in terms of how to interpret prophetic literature. Another name for this prophetic literature is that it's apocalyptic. Apocalypse basically meaning hidden. It's hidden for a reason. It's hidden so that we can continue to have faith and place our faith in God, that He will take care of us. And at the end of the day, the encouraging word is that God wins. And that's that's all we really need to worry about. I mentioned also at the beginning of the class that this section of Daniel contains 4 visions. This is the first one. Next week, we're fixing to have another one that kind of builds on this one. So if you will, please read chapter 8, and that will be the subject of our lesson for next week. Thank you all again for your time and attention. I hope you got something of value out of this lesson. If you have any comments or you want to follow up in any way, I'm happy to visit with you offline. In the meantime, please stay cool. Please stay hydrated with this super hot weather we're having. And please pray for rain, because we do need it. Thanks a lot. Have a great week. See you next Sunday, Lord willing.